this is Kerwin of Father.Son.Galaxy, and we are here to talk about Andor Season 2. This is our time to do a wrap-up, and who else could we have on our podcast to talk about Andor Season 2? Our good friend to the show, Catherine LaSalle. Catherine, welcome back to Father.Son.Galaxy.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be back. Long overdue, but I'm very, very excited. It's just, you're all so amazing. Thank you for the generous invite to join you.
No problem. I mean, you're always in our thoughts because we're checking your social media and we see the pictures, and you've been very busy for the last couple of years. So we are so happy for everything that you're doing.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Likewise, the feeling is so mutual. Everything that you guys, the opportunities that I've seen, as I was telling you in the pregame, every time I log on to YouTube and I see who you guys are interviewing next, all the amazing guests you've had on your channel over the past few years. So I'm so honored to finally be able to return. And we have to make this a more regular thing, truly.
Yes, we do. So I'm just so glad to have you and that you're making time for this. You know, I was watching your episodes of your rewatch episodes, the reactions to the Andor episodes. What I enjoy when I'm watching your reviews and, you're seeing everything for the first time, it is, pure raw emotion. I mean, you don't hold back. You're laughing, you're crying, you're cheering, and sometimes that's all in the same episode. Like, that's what Star Wars is about.
Yes, goodness. I think that totally perfectly describes the show, because one minute I'm cracking up because of K2SO, and then the next my heart is being ripped. And so I felt the same experience, when I would go back and watch my reactions, because I was like, how am I experiencing this range of emotions within the span of maybe 2 minutes apart? 1 minute I'm perfectly fine, and then the next breaking down. But that I think is a testament to this season in particular, season 2. I think the emotional weight of it was heightened.
Yeah. It was a roller coaster ride. So, so I wanted to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to cover 12 episodes of season 2? And I think the better thing to do is just talk about the characters, right? And what, about their journey and what they got involved in and how it began and how it ended for them. So, and we could do it in pairs, because I think, a lot of the characters, they're, intermingling, they're connected with each other. So I thought it'd be fun to just do couples. All right. So the first couple we're going to talk about is Syril Karn and Dedra Meero. The oddest odd couple I have ever seen.
But somehow my favorite characters in the whole show, like, I don't even know how that happened, especially following season 1. I don't know about you, but I was not anticipating them becoming a literal couple. But dare I say, I think it humanized them. Perhaps. Maybe not humanized them, but it opened up some room for vulnerability for each of them, I think.
Yeah. It was interesting. So when Syril saved Dedra's life at the end of season 1, Bix Road, when they had that rebellion taking place on Ferrix, and she got caught up and she fell to the ground, and he pulled her up and saved her life, literally. And I knew by the look at her face, she was like, happy, but also disgusted that it was him that saved her. I'm thinking, okay, well, how is this going to play out in season 2? And I know what she's going to feel. If someone saved my life, I'm thinking, well, I owe this person a debt. They saved my life. I got to do something for them. I have to give them something. So the first thing I thought was, okay, well, he wants to be a part of this empire. So you give him like a high class, important position, and he would go away. But I think because Syril is so infatuated with Dedra that it wasn't that easy to do. So, but I'm wondering if what she was feeling for Syril was actually real. Like, do you think that she really had feelings for Syril, or was she just using this as maybe a business transaction, or maybe just to use him to get what she needed? What do you think?
Right. I was curious about that the entire season, particularly in the earlier half. I genuinely questioned the legitimacy of their relationship and whether it was requited. A two-way street, going both ways. And I actually I bought it in episode 8. That's when it hit me to see Dedra have just her breakdown and completely come undone following Syril's death. Whether she knew at the time or not that he had been killed, he was collateral and everything on Gormen, but I believed it all too late, when it was too late for them. That's when I actually felt like perhaps there was some genuine love between them that she perhaps was just incapable of showing. But you raised a really good point, because I was like, what does she see in him? But his dedication and his perseverance in every other element of his life, his career most importantly, but that I didn't even consider extends into his relationships too. And that can be perhaps irresistible even for Dedra, even if she's not capable of showing the same affection. I truly did not believe it. I really thought she was using him as well, especially when we got to Gorman. But it was then, when it all fell apart, that I thought, oh my gosh, she's lost him. And now it actually, I felt bad for ever doubting that she might have actually cared about him.
They do have a few things in common. Of course, they love the Empire. They're loyal to the Empire, and they're very particular people, like very clean, kind of like maybe OCD. They want things, they're dressed to the nines. And Syril, especially, he likes things in a certain order, and that's what the Empire is about. It's about order. I think that's something that they're trained to do, is to, stand up straight, wear your clothes, make sure you're clean, follow, just follow orders. So they have that in common. But, I'm still going back and forth with Dedra's, her motivation. It's possible that she might have feelings for him, but didn't know how to express it. Because remember at the, I think it was episode 3, when Cyril's mom came to visit, and Dedra told a backstory as how she got started with the Empire. She was in Kinderblock, and so apparently she was very young, and all she knew throughout her life was the Empire. And Cyril's mom made a comment about, well, the only thing that you're missing is your mother's love. And she had a good point, because because she didn't have a family, like a loving family around, that maybe she didn't know how to love, and she didn't know how to express it, even though she might have feelings for him. So when she tries to express love, it comes out being a little cold, or, So I go back and forth. I'm not quite sure, if she really had feelings for him, or if she did, but that was the only way she knew how to express them.
Yes, that's a good point. I forgot we get a little delve into her backstory and explanation as to why she is the way she is, having been orphaned. And I imagine you're not getting much love into maternal or paternal affection in an imperial orphanage at that. So that's a good point. She probably just lacked the skill set, if you want to even call it that, just the emotional skill set, perhaps, the capability to express it. I think for me, I bought it because I think it raised the stakes for both of them if there was actual care there for Syril to walk away from her. For him, the heartbreak of learning that he'd been used not just by the Empire that he so desperately wanted to be accepted by, but by his partner, by Dedra, by perhaps the woman of his dreams. I think it just heightened the stakes for each of them. I need to rewatch the season going into it actually believing that they're a couple, because I really was in denial for the first half of the show. But to see it through that lens of really believing, okay, in spite of how awkward they are together, these two are perhaps kindred spirits in a way. As you said, they have a lot of overlapping qualities and character traits. And so I think I overlooked that during the first half of the season, and I just didn't realize it until it was too late. And Syril was dead, and it kind of hit me. So I need to rewatch it through that lens.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll probably talk about them further on in the conversation, but let's move on to the next couple. Let's talk about Vel and Cinta. Yeah, so tragic. We knew that these two had feelings for each other in season 1, but it was always about the mission, right? Even Cinta said it to Vel that the mission always comes first. So they were not able to sit and talk and express their feelings. And then apparently at the beginning of this season, has no idea where Cinta is until episode 3, where Cinta shows up as a chauffeur/assassin.
Yes.
Working, doing her job. But they did get a moment, it was very brief, to actually express how they feel about each other. What do you think about the scenes between Vel and Cinta?
Oh, I thought they were some of the strongest in the show, hence why I was devastated when they finally reconnect. And of course, you could just tell. I don't know if it was the same for your viewing experience, but it's, of course, they're gonna reconnect and really confess their feelings for each other and not let the mission at hand get in the way like it always does. As you were saying, they always kind of put business first because they work in such high stakes operations, so they have to. And I think Cinta in particular is better at shutting off those emotions and drawing that boundary when they have to lock in. So I was like, they're finally going to be able to have a heart to heart and just, tear away all those layers of the baggage of their jobs, for lack of a better word, their roles as Luthens, assassins, as Cinta was, as she became. But of course, it was just, I'm so glad that we got some of that closure and clarity, rather, on their true feelings for each other. That's a couple who I believed loved each other. And of course, then, I don't know about you again, but I was just watching that scene like, they're finally sharing their feelings for each other, and one of them is going to die. In that moment, I was like, they're going to give us this beautiful reunion, and then they're going to take one of them away. So who's it going to be?
Yeah, right. And the next scene is, Cinta's gone, and it happened so quickly. I mean, it was totally unexpected. But if you, think about the setting, they were working with amateurs, right? They're working with the Gormens and trying to attempt this heist and steal the Empire's weapons so they could use it for themselves to defend themselves against the Empire. And they're not listening to authority. Cinta's in charge and Vel is in charge. And, Vel is telling, I think his name was Sam, not to bring any guns to the heist. There's no need for guns, but of course he didn't listen. And there was this accident that took place and gunshot went off and Cinta's gone. And Vel, just that speech that she gave to Sam and then just ripped into him was just so moving. It was absolutely wonderful. Do you have any thoughts about the that scene and Vel's reaction to watching Cinta die in her arms?
You made a really good point that perhaps explains why I was so frustrated with that scene, because it does happen so quickly. There's not even last words between the two. Like, Cinta doesn't even get last words, or I guess really nobody does when they die in this show, but I never even processed that. Maybe that's why I was furious. But I think that was the whole point, to create this death for this character following this beautiful, exploration of their relationship between Vel and Cinta. To have that death happen as abruptly and suddenly and as under such infuriating circumstances as it was, I think that was the point, to really get under your skin and make you question why, just begging into the ether, Tony Gilroy, why? But the point is, I think that's the point. Death is like frustrating and unexplainable and infuriating, and sometimes happens, especially in war, I imagine, for horrific and god-awful mistakes at reasons like that. So, but the aftermath with Vel ripping into him, oh my gosh, that gave me life afterwards. I needed something to rally, and seeing her not shed any tears while he's sobbing his eyes out, I think was the highlight of that. Vel, that actress, I'm a huge fan of hers. I've loved her work in Game of Thrones, and she just has this great commanding essence. Her aura, I think she was perfectly cast for this, and I'm glad that she had a moment there, a well-deserved monologue towards him.
Yeah, I enjoy these monologues. I mean, every time I hear one, I have to write it down. But, with Belle's, she said, I'm not going to say, remember this, because I don't have to. This is on you now. This is like skin. You're taking her with you wherever you go for the rest of your useless life. She was a warrior. She was everything that you have daydreamed about. She was a blooded, fearless warrior whose loss will be mourned in a way that you never will understand. She was a miracle, and to die like this because of you, some whining, simpering, foolish child. Don't you dare cry. You'll make up for this forever. Yeah, so.
Dang!
What else can you say, What else can you say? So it was very heartbreaking to see it happen, especially when the scene right before is when they rekindle and they're back, and they truly express their feelings. They love each other. We can clearly see that, and then death is unexpected. It's unfortunate, but that's something that Star Wars teaches us. That here
quite a lot, unfortunately. This is just another day as a Star Wars fan. Which of our favorite characters is gonna have a tragic death this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing. It's you're joking, but it's true. It's like, okay, well, who's gonna die? Like, okay, who's next? This is Star Wars, but it's something that we expect. But you know, it's part of good storytelling. You know, of course, all the characters can't stay around forever, but if their death fits into the storyline, then it makes sense. You know, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. It is tragic, but you know, we'll accept it. All right, so next group, we'll talk about the Empire and Gormen.
Ooh.
Yeah. So now, what I love about Andor, both seasons, you get to see the inside of the Empire. Like you're sitting right inside their conference room, and you're just hearing how things run. Right? Partagaz, wonderful character. What I like about his leadership, and I'm talking about the Empire. I know I'm talking about leadership, but you have to, you know, honor the way they keep order. You know, if you look at the room, it is just stark white. Their uniforms are white, not a spot anywhere. It's clean. And the way Partagaz runs his meeting, you know, he's not like the type of leader who'll just sit and, you know, talk, you know, and try to overtake everything in a meeting. And, you know, he has a lot to say. He'll sit down and say, okay, well, here's a problem. All right, how do we fix it? And then he just goes around the room, or, you know, if somebody has, you know, a thought, and he says, okay, well, maybe not, but how about you? And, well, what about you? Ah, that's good. Okay, all right, let's move on with that. I think that's fantastic leadership, that he has this trust in his people where he does listen, you know, listen for their thoughts, listen to their opinions, and their opinions matter. And it was running like a smooth ship, you know, up until, you know, the Gorman massacre. But you could tell that Partagaz, had such mutual respect for Dedra, you know, because she was the smartest person in the room. But she was in a room with, you know, a lot of other men. She could have easily, you know, show her strength and, you know, not show how smart she is, or, you know, be afraid to show her intelligence, thinking that, you know, she'd be put down. But she did. She was one of the smartest people in the room, and Partagaz loved her for it. So what are your thoughts about the Empire, how things were run, and you know, seeing it for the first time on the inside, like being a fly on the wall?
Yeah, you make such an interesting point, because one of my favorite parts about this show is I feel like it really created this new, more accurate image of the Empire, and genuinely how horrific it actually is, in spite of the fact that we see behind the veil. Like, we finally see behind the scenes of how they're operating just workplace meetings. Like, it's in that mundane stuff, their day to day on the job. Yet they still balance that with creating this whole new image of, I mean, my opinion, I think Andor like has single-handedly revived the fear surrounding the Empire, and just how terrible of an opponent they were, obviously, for the rebels. But for Dedra and Partagaz, that's a really good observation as well, that he was always championing her in spite of the fact that he couldn't necessarily play favoritism. And of course, everybody else in that room they're all trying to claw their way up. And there is something so just sterile about it, which is in severe contrast to just the absolute bloodshed and atrocities on their hands. Yet all of this is happening. All these god-awful, life-altering decisions are being made behind closed doors in a room that's perfectly white, shiny, not a speck of dust anywhere. Yet on the outside, in Gormen, it's, you know, we obviously know what happened. Complete stark contrast. So yeah, I think Partagaz, I didn't appreciate his character as much until his end. His end was so unexpected to me.
Yeah.
So now I definitely feel like I need to go back and just rewatch the entire series to just get a better grip on his character. And I never felt this dissent from him, because he always had his head on straight, and I think inspired Dedra to do the same. So for him to make the exit that he did, it just really took me by surprise.
Yeah, it's very interesting about Partagaz, like the way his life ended. That, you know, he's a very strong character. You just wouldn't expect that that would be his way out. But now I'm thinking maybe that was his only way out, and it really, Gorman was part of the reason. You know, with the failure, you know, with what happened there. But remember Aldani. Remember that went down in season 1, and that went very bad for the Empire. So he's had many losses throughout the first 2 seasons. But we never had any inkling that, okay, well, his job was on the line or his life was on the line or this was going to be his last resort. But something about Gorman, because the Death Star was involved, um, Krennic was involved, that the stakes got higher for everyone, including him. If his team messed this one up, getting after Gorman and getting that mineral that they want in the planet, if that fails, that's going to be trouble for everybody, including him. And it was just so well done, that the last few seconds of his character's life, where, he told that other ISB agent, like, well, can you give me a few minutes? And then, the ISB agent walks out of the room and, you see Partagaz pull out this blaster. And then from outside the room, you just hear the blaster shot go off. And then you have that ISB, telling the stormtroopers, don't do anything, just stand right there. And then he bowed his head. It's like, that was very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
I didn't notice that the first time around. The bow of the head is kind of like this silent recognition and mourning in that moment. The way it was done, I was just in a state of shock because, like you said, I never had it. I thought Partagaz, because he was the higher power that Dedra, answered to. There's always a bigger fish, but as we learned, he answers to Krennic, and we know who Krennic is answering to. Tarkin, the Emperor himself. Like, even within the chain of command, nobody is safe, and I think that was one of the best parts of just the Empire's presence in this show. Yes, it established what a threat they are, but it also showed that even those within the system were equally in danger. Like, they were expendable, including Partagaz. Yeah. No, that was, like you said, perhaps that's why it was so shocking. I felt the whole time like, surely he'll be safe, but nobody is safe from the wrath of the Empire if God forbid you make a mistake, which I think is in contrast with, every death with Brasso and Cinta. Every time we lost somebody in Andor's inner circle or one of Luthen's disciples, it felt like a bigger blow. They weren't expendable because they had such strong relationships, versus in the Empire, nobody cared about any of their coworkers. They were trying to tear each other down. So completely different relationships.
As we're talking about the Empire, we have to talk about director Krennic. Of course, Ben Mendelsohn was great to see him back, because he's such a great character. But he was a tyrant, and he's a lot different in Andor than he was in Rogue One. And of course, the reason for that is, being in a room with ISB agents and Dedra Meero and Partagaz is different than being in a room with Tarkin and Vader. You know what I mean? So in Rogue One, Tarkin just put him in his place. As soon as, the Death Star was ready to, was fully operational, Tarkin took the project for himself. Like, okay, well, we don't need you anymore, Krennic, and just go over there. And Krennic got upset, and then he went to Vader to back him up, and Vader just does what Vader does.
He doesn't care.
Yeah, exactly. Vader has, have no clue about the Death Star, doesn't care about it, so that was the wrong person to go to. But anyway, but in Andor in season 2, Krennic absolutely had the upper hand. And the way, when he carried on, where he carried himself in the meeting and he was talking about that mineral, the calcite that they needed from Gormen, and that it had to come from Gormen. There was no other place in the galaxy where you could find this mineral, which is very interesting. So we're just going to take it, and we'll take it with force. So that's how he came about. And then the scene in episode 11 when he's interrogating Dedra, I thought that was just chilling. I wasn't expecting Krennic to be that way. But again, he's just being a tyrant because he has to. His job is on the line. The Death Star plans are probably out there somewhere, and someone's going to get at it. So he's in a lot of trouble with Tarkin. So that's the Krennic that we're getting in Andor, which is very different from the one we're getting in Rogue One. What else do you want to say about Krennic and his performance?
Yes, you raised such a good point that he is so different when we see him, perhaps I guess I felt that because I rewatched Rogue One recently, and it just stuck out to me how everyone is dunking on him, and he's under such severe, like he's a pot getting ready to boil over as well, if God forbid he slips up. And so to learn all the additional context of all these fires that he's putting out, all this like muddy workplace drama in the ISB, which, as we were just saying, is extremely put together and regimented and not a speck of dust, not a hair out of place. Everybody is locked in. For all of that to be unfolding, all of that just, again, like that's how I'm sure Vader perceived it. Like those workplace drama. He's like, I don't care whose project this is, whether Tarkin takes it or you. I don't care about any of you. So that was just hysterical to see. Hysterical to go back and watch Rogue One and see Krennic suffering from the same hubris and downfall that Dedra ultimately suffered. For her undoing was sparked by her own ambition and this drive that perhaps, you know, she crossed too far over the line because of she saw the aspirations she had for herself. And I think there was Krennic, that amazing scene you're referring to, absolutely grilling her for those reasons, for getting in over her head. Yet he's flying too close to the sun as well, and perhaps pushing more buttons than she was. You know, she was working under her own operation there for her drive to find access, whereas Krennic he's picking fights with Tarkin, he's forcing an audience upon Lord Vader. Like, he is testing his luck to the extent. So it was very satisfying to go back and watch Rogue One and see him kind of get a taste of the medicine that we saw him inflicting upon everyone in the ISB.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The Gormen massacre. Let's talk a little bit about that. We first heard about this massacre in an episode of Rebels a few years ago. We didn't know what it was about, what happened. Now seeing it for yourself. You know, I don't know how many times you've seen that episode, but now that you had a break from seeing it, maybe a week's break, what are your thoughts about the Gormen massacre? What feelings does it bring up for you thinking about it?
I still can't believe that they even were able to have that episode get made. And honestly, I was curious. I've been thinking about you guys and Keith the entirety of this season, because it was rather intense for Star Wars, that boiling point. And I would argue in hindsight, I think that definitely feels like it was the climax, for lack of a better word, the most climactic moment of this season, kind of what everything was working towards before it boiled over. And then everything was kind of like the aftermath and the stress afterwards. But I still can't watch that episode without crying. And I still can't, it hasn't lost its luster nor the shock value each time I've rewatched it. So I've been, ever since even the first arc, episode 3, I've been curious about you guys watching, with younger, kids in your household for Star Wars, because I would always argue that Star Wars I feel like inherently is always, there's something about it that is tailored to, teaching the younger audience, even if it's catered to the adult audience, which I would argue everything on Gormen certainly was. Definitely more mature and still mind-blowing even for me. But I was curious to hear from your perspective, do you think, did it take it too far, or is it important to show the severity, because it also unfortunately mimics our real world? And I don't think that episode, I keep saying it no longer felt like science fiction. It felt like reality.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question that you ask. For me, I thought it was brilliant. I'm talking about me as an adult. It was brilliant, and it did feel real. And I think that's the reason why I enjoyed it so much, is that this could happen anywhere. At any time. It's happened in the past. It can happen again. Just watching these people. They're proud of who they are, where they're coming from. The anthem that they were singing, "We Are the Gore," in their language was beautiful. And that just shows solidarity, and that they were going to stand up to this empire, although they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. But it didn't matter. They were there. They represented. They stood up, and they were very brave people. And I could see that. Now, I did not watch this episode with Keith, and I don't know if Keith really had any interest in watching the episode, or he wanted to watch it. He didn't want to watch it together, but apparently he went ahead and watched it by himself, and I didn't know about it until the next day, and it would have been nice to watch together to see his thoughts and his reaction. But he was kind of like, these teenagers, like, oh, it was all right, it was cool, type of thing, and then he just walks away. It was like, okay. So I think he's going to feel it. If he were to go back and revisit it when he's 18 or 22, it's going to feel a lot different than when he was 13. You know what I mean? Because I think he would, have a clear understanding as to what exactly is happening. I think you do have to have a few years, behind you to really understand, what dictatorship and oppression really means, and how people from all walks of life can just get the courage to stand up to what they think is wrong, and stand up for their rights. But it's Andor is not for everybody. I would definitely tell you that it's not something that I would have a child under 10 years old to watch. Maybe not even 13, because I just don't think they feel the impact of it. It's when they get older. When he gets older, I think he's going to look at it a lot differently.
Yeah. Very well said. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Because that episode reduced me to tears that I feel like I haven't sobbed like that since I was a baby. I was saying in my reaction, but I think you raise a really good point that here I am as adults watching this, like, this is some of the most harrowing stuff I've ever seen in Star Wars, and I cannot believe they got this approved. But you do need that lived experience, and that, just even being in school, going through history, having the knowledge of the fact that this is in direct correlation with, unfortunately, our history and current times, even, I would argue. So I think that adds to the weight of it. Whereas I think you make a good point. If I were just a kid, I'd probably be like, whoa, but not. It's harder knowing the real life implications and the fact that it is not fiction, as I was saying.
Right. They don't understand the gravity of it, that something like this has happened and it can happen again. To them, it's just a TV show. Like, what's the big deal thing?
Yeah.
But, and I recall that you mentioned that this, in your opinion, was the best Star Wars episode you've ever seen. And, there's a lot, and I understand that a lot of fans have said the same thing, because there's just so much to take in, and it was wonderful to watch. I wonder, years from now, if people are going to have trouble rewatching something like that, something that's so intense. Like, the rewatchability is what I'm trying to say. Like The Empire Strikes Back. I'm not trying to compare it to The Empire Strikes Back, but I brought it up anyway. The Empire Strikes Back, to me, has rewatchability. For me, I can watch that any day, any time for the rest of my life. The Gormen Massacre, I don't know if it's something that I would want to go back and revisit. What do you think? Is it too early to know? Do you need time to think about it and then go back maybe a few months later?
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, that's totally valid. And even I myself, I know it in the moment, I was like, is this recency bias that I'm claiming right here, right now, in this fresh moment, while my emotions are still surging, that I find this to be some of the best Star Wars ever? Am I going to still mean that in a few years' time? And to your point, rewatchability. My husband, Tom, Revenge of the Sith is his favorite. It breaks. I can't watch it at the rate that he does. He wants to watch that movie. If he could, he would watch it every single day. And I'm like, why? Like, I need let me recharge for 6 months before we watch this again, because it hurts the same as it did when I was a child. So perhaps that's also why I have so much childhood trauma and sadness associated with that movie. Being 9 years old, I think, when I first watched it, and watching Anakin's downfall as a kid. So maybe that feels differently, the heartbreak I still feel associated with that now, and why it's hard for me to rewatch. Perhaps that will be different, being an adult and seeing like the real world implications of Gorman and Andor season 2, episode 8. I don't think I'm going to be revisiting that, for leisure. And I think it also needs the build up. So much of the success of that episode, I think, was because it had been a ticking time bomb, essentially. And even though we knew it was coming, it still exceeded even my expectations. So To your point, yes. Is it? I don't know if can something necessarily even be the best Star Wars if I can't go back and watch it and relish it. And even I surprised myself. Like, how is this? Why do I feel like this is the best? Yet I'm emotionally ruined on the inside. But I think that's because my favorite elements of Star Wars are when it brings you to tears or makes your heart break. As we were saying, there's so much tragedy infused in Star Wars. Unfortunately, we're no strangers to it. So perhaps that's what resonates with me the most.
Yeah, yeah. And, we also lost Syril in this episode. Very, I don't know, the choreography of the fight scene was just amazing. It's probably one of the most brutal fight scenes I've ever seen on screen. Like in a movie or on TV. It just looked like they were just really exchanging blows. But I know Syril is one of your favorite characters, and how did you feel about the way his journey ended?
Oh, I was shocked. I was in disbelief because, again, like Cinta's, it was so sudden. And unlike Cinta's, there was a moment there where he could have at least had some last words. And so when the blast hits, because you're waiting with bated breath, what's his answer going to be to Andor as he's questioning, who the heck are you? Like, why are we beating each other up? And so you think you're going to get this moment of clarity or this revelation after he's coming off of these epiphanies that he also had, this Icarus, unfortunately, downfall and flew too close to the sun. Yes. I feel like everybody in the ISB ended up having that same fate, and then it all comes crumbling down in front of him. So you're like, oh my God, he's going to have this amazing revelation. What's he going to say? And then it felt like we were robbed of that. But again, so much of death is unexpected, sudden, and, for Syril in particular, it was all too little too late in his final moments of clarity. And I just can't believe that reduced me to tears. For some reason, I think it's because now that I've had some hindsight, because I've been trying to dissect, he did an awful thing. Now, why do I feel sad seeing his downfall? Why did that break my heart in spite of all his baggage? And I think in that moment, it felt like he was reduced to this boy. Like we see his mom, Edie, baby him and kind of patronize him the entirety of their relationship in the show. And he's always kind of fighting against that to establish himself as a man and his career and his drive. And in that moment, it kind of just felt like he was reduced to this boy on the inside that never had a father and was always fighting to prove his own worth, even just to himself. And unfortunately just followed the wrong pathway to achieve that through, the Empire. And then to see him, all of that full circle, just he becomes a victim of it. I thought Syril's one of my favorite characters. Like, it is wild. Because I didn't feel that way about him in season 1, Syril. So much of the work of him in season 2 is where it started to click for me. Like, this is a phenomenal character. And his performance, of course, as well, I think cemented it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Syril thought that all his life he just wanted to do the right thing. And he was on the right track, when he was working as one of the Morlana officers, and, he was trying to go after Cassian in the first season and, could not catch him. And instead he left just a trail of destruction. Like when he was on Ferrix, remember what happened with Ferrix? People lost their lives there as well because of him. And he's looking around, when Luthen and Cassian escape on the speeder bike, and he's just looking around at the destruction, and he's like wondering, like, well, what did I do? He had that same exact look during the Gormen massacre. There's a scene where he is just looking around. It's like, did I cause all this? Because partly you did, because, you were being used by the Empire. But you were also naive, because I think Syril's goal to me was always to be known as a good soldier or a good person working for the Empire. He wanted accolades and recognition. And that's the reason why he was so gung-ho about moving up the ladder. getting this position, getting that position, going to Gorman and being this intermediary. He thought he was being important and that he was doing good work. And then once this work is all done, that he would get recognized by Partagaz or the Emperor. Who knows? That's what he wanted. And it turned out that no one really cared. Especially when he got to a point when we had that fight with he and Cassian. And Cassian looks at him and he's holding the blaster at Cassian. And Cassian looks at him and says, well, who are you? It's like, wow, like all this work that I've done up to this point and still it doesn't matter, And I think that's the tragedy of Syril Karn. Like, you're right. He wanted to impress his mom so much because she babied him. She didn't think that he had the courage to better than maybe his dad did, or he couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. And he tried so hard and then still it got him nowhere.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was an incredible observation on your part. I didn't even think about that or clock that in season 1, the first arc of Andor, after all of that on Ferrix, the botched job there.
Yes.
And we see him after he kind of like loses his big boy, because we see so much of his vulnerability in the way he shies and kind of like turns in on himself protectively when he's in the midst of his mother, who I would argue bullies him, into submission. And so we can see that side of him there that's sheltered. But then when we see him snap in, as he did on Ferrix there, he is like almost high off of all of this, like this power trip of it's happening. I have power. I think to your point, I do not think that's a crazy thought that Syril probably envisioned, if he just tried and worked hard enough, that he could like receive a medal from the Emperor himself. Like, that was probably his life's goal. And so when he has these failures and he is reduced back, like all of that fades away in an instant. And that expression you're talking about in his performance, I need to go back now and look at the similarity between the two of those when and it all falls apart on Ferrix and then again on Gormen. You're so right. I never even noticed that. And now I need to go back and rewatch it.
Yeah. Syril is a very interesting character, but, his journey ended. So let's move on. So we have 2 more, another pair. Let's talk about Mon Mothma and Vel Organa. All right. Now, Bail, let's just get this out the way. It's not Jimmy Smits. It is Benjamin Bratt. How did you think Benjamin Bratt did as Vel Organa?
Truthfully, this is just me. It was personal. It was just kind of a mental blockage for me of the new actor. And he did a great job. And I think he even brought new things to the character that we've not necessarily seen from Bail, that I think not contradict the Bail that we know from Jimmy Smits's performance. But I applaud that he wasn't afraid to clearly do his own thing with it, and I think it lent itself well, especially to the circumstances where we see Bail in this season, where he is, we see him butting heads with Cassian. We see that there's flaws within his own, pocket of the rebellion, and Luthen has to kind of like bail Mon out because his group is corrupted. I think so. I think it felt, obviously, the inherent just different performance, different actor. But I appreciate that he wasn't afraid to take a different approach to Bail, kind of like the tough love that we see him have once he's on Yavin and has that leadership role with the Alliance. But yeah, there was just, again, that's personal, because I know some people were also very, like, they couldn't click with the recast, and some people, like, immediately. I think for me, that's always just a tough thing to mentally get over. But I like that in spite of being a recast, he brought something new to the role and made it his own, and wasn't trying to do just an imitation of Bail's renditions in the past.
There was never a moment where whenever he came on screen, I said to myself, man, I wish Jimmy Smits was here. Now, because I think he just did a fantastic job. And he actually, to me, I think he actually made the character even better, because of what he had to do and what he said and how he, Mon and Bail didn't always agree on things, but they still worked together and they still believed in this rebellion. He knew when he needed to be there, because Yavin, he said, wasn't ready. But if Mom was going to make that speech, she had to leave immediately, and he had her back. Granted, like he had some people that he was going to have escort her out of the Senate floor, and they turned out to be, well, at least one of them turned out to be a spy for the Empire. But that wasn't intentional. I think he always had Mom's best interest at hand, and I thought the two of them on screen, Benjamin Bratt and Genevieve, they worked very well together. Yeah, just the moment when he said to her, well, he dropped the S-bomb, but they were talking right before she made that speech, and how encouraging he was to her, and said, you have to do this. I can't go with you, but you do you, and then I'll be there. I will see you at Yavin. And that's exactly what he did. And it was a great performance. It was a great performance. So I don't have any issues with him. Whether Jenny Smith comes back to do it, or if it's Benjamin Bratt, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking, okay, well, well, what are we going to do now? Like, okay, you got to choose one or the other, but it doesn't matter.
Good point.
I think they're both great. Yeah, they're great actors. And Benjamin Bratt, Jenny Smith, they've been around for a very long time, at least 30 years in the business. So,
they know what they're doing. Yeah,
exactly, they do. Yeah. And then how about Mon's speech? Let's talk about that speech. I mean, that was amazing. So the death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. When truth leaves us, we let it slip away. When it is ripped from our hands, we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest. What happened yesterday on Gormen was unprovoked genocide, and the truth has been exiled from this chamber. And the monster screaming the loudest, the monster we've helped create, the monster who will come for us all soon enough is, and she drops the name.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that you write these out, because
I love it. I expect this from Andor. Like, season 1 was just like a treasure trove of good dialogue. Let me write this down. And so season 2 is no different. So, yeah. What do you think of the speech?
Yes. Similarly to Gormen, especially coming off of episode 8, it's like, wow, how can they top this with the emotional weight and just sheer relevance to current times, and how that impacts the viewing experience. And then we got her speech, and I was reduced even more to, oh gosh, this doesn't even feel like fiction anymore. This feels like, how the heck did Tony Gilroy know when he was writing this however many years ago? Because I imagine he wasn't writing this yesterday. Exactly. I imagine he's had this. How is he so prophetic? I mean, as you said earlier, to your point, history just repeats itself. So whether he knew or not how relevant this was going to be, the words she's delivering, whether he knew it or not, I'm sure, from that perspective, to write something and it's still relevant and applies so directly to the times we're living in, that of course just elevates the viewing experience. Even it makes it resonate. Again, it doesn't feel like science fiction. It feels like this could be our real life. It sounds like things you hear in our current, our state of the world, in our country at least, what you hear. So it's like, how did they find a way, in spite of all the violence and bloodshed and everything on Gormen, there was still an equal battle going on in the Senate, the political battle that is just as high stakes. I was fearing for Mon that whole time. We know she gets it. We know she was going to be fine, and I was like, girl, run. I was terrified.
Yeah, it was so well staged. It's just the acting and the design and the setting, the camera movement. It was just wonderful. It was a spy novel, or a spy movie. Sorry, it was a spy movie. It was wonderful. Yeah, it was wonderful. All right, Luthen, Rael, and Kleya. Let's talk about these two characters. What do these two characters mean to you, if anything? Are they? Yeah, let's talk about Luthen. What do we have to say about Luthen?
Once again, cemented in, I think, as one of the best characters in Star Wars, and it's just crazy to me, his impact, and how nothing in Rogue One would ever happen without him. Yet the first time I going to see Rogue One however many years ago, no idea that Luthen existed, and I think that is the crux of his character and what he knew and always accepted from the start, that he's going to make that ultimate sacrifice and might not ever be remembered for it. You know, he lives in the shadows, he'll die in the shadows, and that will be his. He won't have a legacy because so much of his life was lived between the cracks in order to maneuver and do what he had to do. But of course, the revelation of the reality of their relationship at the end was the icing on the cake.
Yeah. If I could, talk about episode 10 a little bit, I absolutely love this episode. And I think in my opinion, that this is my favorite of Star Wars television, the best. And the reason why is what makes Andor such a strong series is that the producers, the writers knew that, okay, well, we know Cassian Andor, we know his fate, we know what happens to him, but we need to create a backstory to get people interested in watching. Remember, back in, I think, 2022, when season 1 came out, no one really paid any attention to Andor. No one thought this was going to be anything. I think it came out the same year as Obi-Wan Kenobi. So all eyes were on Obi-Wan, and then when, depending on how you think of the series, that didn't fall through. And then Andor came out, and everybody's like blown away, like, wow, I can't believe it. And the reason why is not just Andor, but the characters, supporting characters that we have never known, met for the very first time, like Luthen and Kleya and Lonnie Young and Partagaz. All these characters, there are no weak characters in the bunch. None of them, So our interest was in these characters because we don't know anything about them. We don't know where they come from, where they're going, how their story is going to end. Episode 10 focused on just those brand new characters. No legacy characters. We didn't see Andor. We didn't see Mon Mothma. We didn't see Bail. None of the legacy characters that we are familiar with was in this episode. It was all new characters, right? And I think it just gave the writers and director to just have free reign, to just be creative, because you don't have to rely on canon, what's in the comic books, because they don't exist anywhere else except on this screen. And that they can just create whatever they wanted. And the way Luthen went out was just fabulous. I mean, it's the way his story ended. I didn't see it coming. It just felt like I was watching like a Shakespearean play. It was just very tragic. It was cheerful. And then you got this backstory that, wasn't expecting. And it all made sense when you saw how Kleya and Luthen met and how they, became to rely on each other. And he's teaching her about, how to, use a blaster, or how to, detonate a bomb. Like, you don't look at the site before you, hit the button. You hit the button first, and then you look. Like little things like that she picked up from him, and she was able to use that in the present day to try to get him out of the hospital. And then I thought, like you, that, okay, well, how is she going to get him out of there? But that was not her. Yeah, I know.
Did you also believe, though, I'm looking for validation everywhere. Like, did you also believe that she might have gone with the intention of trying to get him out? That's why I locked in. I was like,
I did.
She's gonna go get him. But of course, I felt stupid for even believing that, because we, as the audience, knew that he was only surviving because of the room that they had him in, and
right, yes,
without it. So how, even still, seeing her determination, maybe that's what got me, because Kleya is such a stone cold, she'll lock in whenever she has to, perhaps more so than anybody else in Luthen's group. And so when I saw her on the move, I was like, maybe there's a chance. Okay, I'm just glad I'm not the only one who thought that she might have gone with the intention to get him.
Yeah, I know she was just one person, but I had hopes that she was going to somehow wheel him out of there and get him on a ship and get him out. But when she got into the room, she stopped, and then she just, Elizabeth DeLisle, fantastic actor. She walked into the room and she stopped. And then you could just see this like sadness come over her face. And I said, she's not there to save him. You know what I mean? So so heartbreaking. It was just, it was totally unexpected. Like I said, we didn't know how these characters, his journey was going to end, and there it did. There it happened. So he said that I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. So he told us already that he wasn't going to make it. And he was satisfied that, okay, well, he's given the rebels so much information, and that his job is done.
Gosh, that's so true. He'd passed the baton at that point. That was his role. He served his purpose. You're so right though. He literally tells us in season 1 that he's resolved to, dying at the hands of the Empire if it means he can fight them. And I still didn't believe it until the very second it happened. But yeah, and to your point, I didn't even notice that was just an episode, solely driven by those two characters who we had never met before this show. And I think that's, to your point, you said it perfectly. One of the best parts of this show is all of these new characters and the relationships, as we've been discussing, and just, of course, the writing and the performances and the character development. And that is truly what a huge driving force of this whole series was, and I think is so successful and hopefully bodes well for the future of Star Wars going forward, because I love meeting new characters and seeing new stories. Yes, I love the legacy characters, but I know there's a whole galaxy of other folks out there whose names we don't know that have huge, massive roles in something like the Rebellion or just taking down the Death Star.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, it was big. It hit me, and I remember, when I watched that episode for the first time, and it ended. I was in this room, and then Tanya walked in, and I just looked at her and I said, "I just saw the best episode of Star Wars I've ever seen." So
oh my God!
That was episode 10 for me. So yeah.
Wow.
All right, we're down to our last two characters, Andor and Bix.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. So I don't even know where to start. It's the writing is just exceptional. That they needed to figure out, okay, well, they created this great love story. And love stories, you don't see them often in Star Wars. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But this one was, I would say, even better than Han and Leia. It was just so layered. It's so complicated. And the writers had to figure out a way to move Bix out of the way so that Cassian can finish his mission, right? Because he had to. But they had to do it delicately, I think, and they had to do it, intelligently. And I think this is just wonderful writing. Having Bix make the decision for them, after meeting that Force healer, and she had a conversation with the Force healer and says that this man is a messenger and he's on a mission to do something great. I don't know her, I didn't write her dialogue down, but something similar to that, where he had something bigger to do. And then Bix realized, okay, you know what? He can't do it with me. So this is the choice I had to make. What do you think of Bix's choice?
You said it perfectly. The use of the word, having her exit, writing it intelligently. Because I think so many people going into this, you can put 2 and 2 together and think, okay, Cassian in Rogue One is pretty locked in, isn't really tethered to anybody relationship-wise that we know of. So clearly something happens to Bix. And I was in a show, especially in a second season where pretty much everybody was dying, I was so grateful that that was not her fate. And that, she had made that choice for herself. And rather made a sacrifice as well, of all people, to be able to draw the line and be like, all right, let's pack our bags and go live our best lives. I would argue she had earned it out of more so maybe than anybody on the show, considering all of the harrowing things that happened to her. And so for her to still sacrifice her own peace selflessly like that, I didn't see it coming. And so it just broke my heart. Perhaps even more if they had killed her off, for lack of a better way to put it. I like that they handled it delicately, as you said, and I think it made it more heart-wrenching in a way, knowing she was still out there waiting for him. But I liked that even in the finale, episode 12, we hear Cassian express maybe some acceptance of it, that she wouldn't have been safe with him. Like, he knows he's already lost everyone he loves. He would have lost her too, God forbid.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have to win. We have to beat them. And I believe you have a purpose in making that happen. I need to believe that. So I'm choosing for the both of us. I'm choosing the rebellion. And when it's over and we've won, we can do all the things we've ever wanted. Everything we know we'd miss, I'll find you. And that was, the last time, Cassian heard her voice, and we know what happens after that. Goes on his mission and leaves behind a child,
Apparently.
Yeah. What a nice touch.
Yes.
So it's I don't expect that every Star Wars series is going to be like Andor. We're not going to get this high caliber writing and acting and directing and production design and costuming, everything from one series. For every series, we're not gonna get that. But it does set a bar higher for Star Wars creators to do a little bit more, be a little bit more creative, be a little bit more bold with the storytelling. But I think we could still get Andor and Skeleton Crew. Like, to me, they're like, opposite sides of the spectrum. But it's all Star Wars. You know what I mean? So it can be as intense as Andor. It could be as lighthearted as Skeleton Crew, and then you got stuff in the middle. What do you think Star Wars has to do to not necessarily maintain this high quality of Andor, but to maybe well, let me ask you this question. I don't want to assume. Do you think Star Wars could do a better job with storytelling, or you think we're okay with what we're getting so far from Star Wars?
I think I wouldn't have questioned the current state of the storytelling and the characters and writing had Andor not come along, because there seems to be a kind of a consistency, and then, at least for me, because I know anyone you talk to might have a different opinion. We all have our different favorite shows, but for me, I feel like everything else is pretty consistent. And then Andor is up here in its own stratosphere. And so I think it has proven, as you said, it has established this new standard of what can be possible. And I think so much of this show is the fact that it's clearly an amazing team. And even when you see the dynamics of the cast and their interactions with Tony and how involved he was and how specifically they were all cast, hearing about the whole process and everyone bringing their A game on production, and just hearing how much they all support and admire each other. And I think when you have a team that strong, it inspires everybody on a set to want to be their best. And I think they just actually announced today, I think Andor was submitted for 23 Emmy nominations. Like, that's what we can be doing. That's Star Wars. So it's giving me hope that if Star Wars can be getting that much Emmy noms in 2025, like, we can keep this trajectory going. I'm clinging to that. I hope.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to move into that. I have that same argument. Because I know you're an actor, so you know about the Emmys. But you're right. So they're submitting. Disney is submitting nominees for 23 categories. It's very interesting. So obviously Diego Luna for lead actor. They're submitting Stellan Skarsgård and Kyle Soller for supporting actor. 5 actresses for supporting actress. So Genevieve O'Reilly, Denise Go, Adria Arjona, Faye Marcy, and Elizabeth Dulau. Guest actor Ben Mendelsohn, Forrest Whitaker, Benjamin Bratt. Guest actress Desperado Sethu, who is Cinta. Character voiceover and cinematography, all kinds of nominations. The music and even the song, the Gormen, We Are the Gore, the Gormen song, they're submitting that for original music. So, I mean,
Wow.
it's a lot of categories. This is just a submission. It doesn't mean that they're going to be nominated, but this gives you a good sign that they really believe in this series and this season. This was like top of the line for them. So they're going for it. So what I want to ask you is, you are again, an actress. Who do you think, we can't give a nomination to everybody, it's just not possible, but who do you think are worthy of Emmy nominations as far as the acting categories?
Ooh, all of them, and I'm I'm thrilled to hear the ones you listed. I hadn't checked the full list. I only saw like the 23, so I'm glad to hear. I think Genevieve O'Reilly is who I lean to. I think her, Kyle Soller, and Denise Dedra. I think stick out to me. I think for Syril and Dedra's characters in particular to be able to craft an antagonist that I'm still crying over their death. That to me, I think that is a huge win if you're an actor playing a villain to still garner sympathy and have people still rooting for you until the very end, because it shows that you can play the complexity and you can show their vulnerability. You can play the I have an acting coach who says, none of us are all good or bad. We all have gray matter. It's like if you're a ball floating on the ocean, one half is always going to be underwater and the other is going to be on the surface. And depending, different halves of us are showing at different times. And I think that was exactly like Kyle and Denise's performances. But Genevieve O'Reilly, if she gets snubbed, I got to go look at the other. As you said, they're not nominees just yet, but if the nominations drop and she's not even on there, the revolution starts now for me.
Right. Yeah. There's going to be a revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you. Definitely Diego Luna. That's like, obvious. Yeah. Stellan Skarsgård. If he does not get nominated, there's a problem with the nomination. So yeah, I agree with you. Kyle should also get a nomination. And you're right. Of the five actresses, supporting actresses, Genevieve and Denise, I said would be the lead, the two in that category that should be nominated. Yeah, yeah. And then
I've never been this invested in the Emmy.
Yeah,
I am about to.
You're right. I know more than I usually know, but yeah, they're going to be announced in July. Guest actor, that's up for grabs. I mean, Ben Mendelsohn, Forrest Whitaker, Benjamin Bratt. I mean, my goodness.
Yes.
So and then by the way, so as far as the writing category, they're going to submit episode 9. So that's the one with Mon Mothma's speech as in the writing category. And as for the directing category, episode 8 is what they're nominating, or what they're
yes,
submitting for.
Fingers crossed.
So that's pretty good. I could see that, direction. Now that was obviously fantastic, and the writing. I mean, that speech, at least from Genevieve, that's the speech that's going to give her that nomination. And somebody wrote that speech, so you also have to award the writer as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I'm very excited about Andor. I think fans are going to be talking about this show for many, and that's good. That's good. That's good quality television. And I feel like for once, we're all in agreement. For the most part, majority of us. Andor may not be for everybody, which is fine, but the ones who watched it, this was just fantastic series. Yeah.
It's been a very fun time in the fandom currently. Because yes, I agree. I've been guilty of saying it too. Like, everybody loves it. I think I can feel it. You can feel it in the Force. If we're all kind of we're in unison for once when it comes to this show. And so the energy and the discourse, it's been. I'm sad it's over, but you're right. People are going to be talking about this show for years to come, because that's how incredible it was, and there's so much still to unpack. And we got it within the span of 4 weeks. I need the next 4 years to process everything that transpired, even just the second season, let alone to go back and watch it as a whole from both seasons. So yeah, I've been saying I'm going to miss it, but I think you're right. We are going to be. There's still a lot to reflect on.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fun. I'm so glad that I was able to have this conversation with you. So thank you so much for taking time out to be on this podcast. It was awesome. And like we said earlier, we definitely have to do more of these episodes, between you and Father.Son.Galaxy. So I'll be reaching out in the future, for more visits.
Likewise, I gotta get you guys over on my channel. Oh my gosh, I'm slacking. Thank you so much. I can't even begin to tell you how excited I was for this. All of you guys are just so...
Yeah.
Whenever I lose hope in the fandom, I think about you guys, and it just immediately brings just so much joy and hope and positivity. And you guys all, I say this every time I talk to you. You all just have the best energy, the best essence, and I think you are just some of the absolute best people in the Star Wars community. And I'm so excited to not only know you and consider you guys friends, but to just have the honor of watching your career and your journey and all of the amazing things that you guys are constantly doing. It seems like you guys are busy. So thank you so much for your time. This was seriously so much fun.
Yeah, no, Catherine, you mean a lot to us because you have a big following, and I don't know how you found out about us, but you really pushed us and promoted us on your channel. So I am so grateful for what you've done, and so just thank you for even recognizing us. So you're very important to us, and we don't want to forget that. That you've done a lot to help us to grow. So thank you.
You're gonna make me cry, Kerwin. I'm so emotionally fragile after Andor season 2.
Yeah.
Thank you. Seriously. Oh my gosh. I'm so honored to even know you guys. So the feelings are so mutual.
Where can people find you?
Oh gosh, I should have prepared for this. Well, my YouTube channel is self-titled Catherine LaSalle. My Instagram is at CatLaSalle2, and I would say those are my most active platforms. Those are also the only ones that I know my full username on. So, but all my links, or I have a website, CatherineLaSalle.com. Duh. I have to not be so allergic to self-promotion. So you should be able to find me on any of those 3.
That's easy enough. Yeah, there's just so many social medias out there. It's too much. But yeah, so you can find us on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Father.Son.Galaxy. Our website is FatherSonGalaxy.com. Just thank you so much, everyone. If you're watching or listening to this episode, this has been our spoiler review of Andor Season 2. Thank you so much once again for joining us. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you again. And I'm going to hit